it wasn't the same. He worked for the enemy. Something happened in Matthew's life that made him turn his back to his own people and go work for the enemy. His people around him saw him as a traitor to his own cause. For Jesus to choose Matthew to be a disciple was a huge step. And we're not exactly sure what all happened there in Matthew's backstory. But Matthew came to the gospel. The gospel changed Matthew. And so we're going to look at that. The Gospel of Matthew is written primarily to a Jewish audience, and it also emphasizes his identity as the Messiah. Makes sense. He's writing for the Jews, and he wants to make a point that Jesus is the Messiah. So he worked for the Romans. The Romans were occupiers of the land. So Matthew was a bit of an outsider. The other point I'd like to make, and here's just a bit of a caution. Matthew is the first of the three synoptic gospels. Synoptic gospels simply say that the gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're connected as far as they include many of the same stories, often in similar sequence and similarity, and sometimes identical wording. This stands in contrast to John. John is very different. John's content is largely distinct. The caution is this: that we in our Western logical mind try to compare and reconcile the differences and try to harmonize the Gospels. We lose something when we try to make everything and try to figure out the identical part of where Jesus went from here to here. There were three different writers, three different distinct personalities writing to three different groups of people. So we get a bigger story if we look at the Synoptic Gospels, but be very careful of recognizing that we don't ruin or miss the character of the writer, because there's something very powerful here if we think of Matthew writing to the Jews and who he puts into this lineage. That actually matters. They're written by different men, different themes to different audiences. And so it's all good. Matthew was, of course, written by the disciple Matthew. Mark was written through the eyes of Peter, and that makes sense. You see words like immediately and from here to there. Peter was a very intense person. Luke was a physician, lots of details. He also wrote the book of Acts, and then, of course, John was written after the others and has a distinctive, different theme and emphasis. So Matthew begins his book with a list of genealogies, and here's the thing we run into, not a problem, but there's a unique thing here. If you look at the genealogies, he skips a few. He skips a few kings. And to us in our Western world, we're like, wait, that's like something's messed up here. Matthew's trying to make a point. We do the same thing. We tell stories, and depending what point you're making in the story, you leave out details, and you include other details. So he left some kings out, and he added some others. Okay, so those are some things that, as a backstory to this little bit here, we'd like for you to remember. So the reason we're choosing this point is because there's 5 women mentioned in this text. 4 of these women come from a very different background than the Jews. Yet he highlights their presence in the lineage. Matthew has a reason for doing this. So we're going to try to see, what is Matthew trying to say here as he looks at these? So Matthew 1 to 17, I don't think we're going to read all of this. It's a lot of text, and we're running a little bit low on time here. So what I'm going to do is simply highlight a couple of in the beginning here. He goes into it. He says, Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. And here's the first thing that is a little bit different. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Tamar is the first woman here. And so there's something unique here. He also highlights a man that isn't even in the lineage. So Perez and Zerah is a twin brother to Perez. And so something's going on here. And so Matthew's making a point that he's saying Tamar is significant here. All right? That's the first point. Second, and so that's the first woman we're looking at here. We go down and we get into the whole, in verse 5, it says, in Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. We know who Rahab was. Rahab was the harlot in Jericho. We keep going, and it says that Rahab, Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, another woman in here, and Obed the father of Jesse, and then Jesse the father of David the king. We keep reading, and it says, David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Another woman, but she's not even named. Okay, so she is, think of her, it doesn't say Bathsheba, it says the wife of Uriah. Was Uriah Solomon's father? Absolutely. And so we're going to do a little bit of just a looking here. Way in the end there we have Mary, and let's just dive in here. So we're looking for selective. They are all mothers. That's a given. They're in genealogy, so of course they're mothers. And so that of course, so Joseph in chapter 39. So chapter 38 is sandwiched here, and there's something powerful here. It's a story of Judah and Tamar. So after Jacob's brothers sold him to Egypt, we go back to Canaan, and it says that Judah left his family, went to live with his friend Hiram. I don't know if the guilt and shame of not standing up for his brother, something was going on in Judah's heart, and he leaves his family and goes and hangs out with his friend. He's a Canaanite. His name is Hiram. He finds a Canaanite woman. He marries her. She bears him 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And it says that Judah got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. First we hear about Tamar, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in God's sight, so God put him to death. Here we're introduced to Tamar. After dies, Judah gives Tamar to his next son, Onan, but Onan is also wicked, and God kills him. So there's the 2 sons. They're killed by God. They were wicked people. Tamar, of course, is a widow, and it seems like she's pretty young. So the tradition is that she is actually to marry the next son to keep the family lineage going. All right? Judah is seeing something here. It's like, I had 2 sons killed. They were wicked, but they married her. Something's going on. I'm not giving her the next son. It's not going to happen. But he doesn't tell her that. He says to her, in Genesis 38, 11 to 12, it says, Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Judah is not a good man. He's not on a good journey. He's estranged from his family. He's not connected with the rest of his family. He's not keeping his word. He's now a widower. Later, his wife dies. And so there's lineage. There's a lot of things going on here. He's now a widower. He's hanging out with Hiram. We know the story. We know how Tamar dresses up like a temple prostitute, seduces her father-in-law into a relationship and gets pregnant with her father-in-law. And we know that she then deceives him to thinking she's a prostitute. He sleeps with her, gets her pregnant with these twins. It's a story of a daughter-in-law seducing her father-in-law. It's a story about injustice. And it's a story of Judah taking advantage of women. But Matthew includes it in this list. Strange. Something's going on. Let's go on. Rahab. It says, and Ram the father of Abinadab, and Abinadab was the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. Okay, another lady here, let's stop. Who was Rahab? She was another outsider. She is a prostitute. She's a Canaanite woman that runs a brothel in Jericho where the Jewish spies hide when they're running from the authorities. And she understands something because she brings him into her house, takes him up on the rooftop, and hides him with like bundles of flax. And then she lies to the authorities and sends them on her way after the wall, lets them down and tells them to go into the country. Beautiful story of a prostitute seeing God's work and turning to him. We get a glimpse of her insight as God using unconventional ways to bring about a bigger story. So we know what happened. Israelites came in. They marched around the wall 7 days. 7th day, they marched around 7 times. They rescue her. She goes to the camp, and all it says in Joshua is that she stayed there the rest of her life. King David. We keep going. So we have a woman that seduced her father-in-law. And this is interesting, right? We have, I think I missed, there you go. I missed one there, so I'll have to go back here. So next we have Ruth. We know a little bit more about Ruth. She was married to a Jew, but she was a Moabite. And so the Moabites actually have a pretty long history with Israel. If you read here, we know what happened there. She's in the first picture there. She's discussing with her mother-in-law, and then she goes back. Orpah, of course, goes back to her people. Ruth then says, "Look, I'm staying with you." And then she keeps going, and she goes into Bethlehem. We're not going to go into these details. You guys know the story. But there's a curse on the people of Moab. And the curse is this. It's simply, in Deuteronomy 23, it says, "No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the way. And when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam of Mesopotamia to curse you. But the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam. Instead, the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. You shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all your days forever." That's a strong curse. We have King David descended from a Moabitess. According to Jewish law, he's not even allowed to go into the assembly. For how long? 10 generations, it says. What happened here? David is 1/8 Moabite. And he goes into the temple of God. Something's going on here, guys. And so there's some patterns going on. There's a powerful lesson, and there's a lot that we can do as it relates to the curse and David's ability to enter the assembly of God, even though he had 1/8 Moabite blood in him. What happened that Ruth is in this story? Okay, we go on. I have to go backward. I'm sorry. I put the slide in the wrong. I was running behind, and I changed some stuff back here, and I must have. Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Like, boy, she is a prime candidate for a lot of counseling. She now she's the wife of the most powerful man in the country. There's just a lot going on here. Grief mixed with shame was mixed up with the desire. We know the story. We know that she was a virgin that was visited by the Holy Spirit. But try telling your mom and your cousins that, right? Yeah, I'm pregnant, but it was the Holy Ghost, right? That was an interesting conversation to have. That was an interesting conversation to have with her fiance. Do you think that story reached Bethlehem before they did? I don't know, but I can imagine that there may have been a part to play. Bethlehem was full, but I'm guessing people were also hesitant to give a place to this couple that she was pregnant before they were married, and they didn't, all of a sudden, they're not staying in my house. Mary had to wrestle through all this. So what do they all have in common? There's many things that we could go here. I just want to bring out one little point, and that is that Mary not so much, but the others were clearly outsiders. They didn't belong to the tribe to the Jews. Matthew was an outsider. He had turned his back on his people. He came back to his people, but these were all people from the outside coming in. Matthew needed to embrace the people that he rejected and make his way back in the Jewish faith. There's no way that he was a practicing Jew if he was working for the Romans at that level. Just not happening. Something had to happen in his life. In his life, he was saying, I think one of the things, there's many things we could go to, but one of the things he's saying is, the gospel, Jesus Christ brought me back and brought me into fellowship. Judah said of Tamar, she is more righteous than I am. Genesis 38, verse 26. Tamar needed to reject, if we read the whole story, she needed to reject her gods and her people, because after she had the twins, she moved in with Judah. They didn't have a relationship anymore, but she then took on a new identity with the people of God. She was a seeker of justice. She made her identity the family of Judah, and by extension, the God of the Hebrews. Didn't matter where she came from, but she made her identity with the people of God. All of a sudden, she fits. Rahab, same thing. By faith, in Hebrews 11, it says, by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. She also had a choice. She was an outsider, and she saw what God was doing, and she made it a decision that was risky. She looked around and saw that her people and her gods were powerless against the God of the Hebrews. She chose to make God's story her story. She was an outsider that chose to forsake her past and cast her lot with the people of God. She joins the people of God, marries Salmon, a direct descendant of Tamar, became King David. She's listed in the Hall of Fame. We have Ruth. And here, I think, is a key to a subject to the Moabite curse. What did Ruth dodge? Your people shall be. Ruth rejected the gods of her homeland and chose to follow the Hebrews' God. She refused to identify with the people she'd been born to and chose to identify with the people who worship God. That choice was more important than any bloodline she had. That connection with the people of God. All of a sudden, her sense of belonging, her circle of belonging wasn't her bloodlines. It was with the people of God. All of a sudden, her people weren't the people that she grew up with, but it was the people that believed like she did. That's an incredibly powerful idea. That just she turned her back on her back story. She looked forward and she identified with the people of God. This was Old Testament. That's the gospel story. It takes away our backstory. We are humans born into Adam's sin, bent toward corruption from the very moment we have the mental power to choose. Jesus offers us a life free from sin and its wages, but we must choose him with our heart, our lifestyle, and our values. We must choose to take on this new identity. And as we take that new identity, we form new circles of belonging. And all of a sudden, the circle of belonging matters. It matters. Bathsheba needed to make a choice as well. We don't know how complicit she was in David's sin, but we do know that later she bore to David a son named Solomon, and she goes on to be a strong figure in the days of David. In the end of David's reign, she then identified with the people. We don't know if she was a Jew or not. She was married to a Hittite, which was not a Jew. We don't know if she was an outsider, but this story is simply this: I don't care. Like the gospel does not matter. The gospel doesn't care where you came from. It's where you're going. And what happens here is, as we identify with the people of God, we recognize that where we're going and the people we connect with actually form the identity that we have. That curse, we have a curse on us that's much worse than the Moabitess curse. It's the curse of sin on our lives. But when we face the gospel and we recognize that Jesus gives us a whole new identity, an identity with the people of God, we have something to be very proud of. We have something that connects us to this. So that's the takeaway from these 5 women in Matthew. There's many more, I get that. But there's a gospel story in that little bit there. Don't miss it. We didn't talk much about Mary, the mother of Jesus. But just for you moms, I'd want you to know that the influence you have is bigger than just your children and your husband. You can be tempted to base your decision on today, but recognize that the influence that they had, the choices they had, the people they chose to connect with long term changed the identity of their offspring for many generations. We're tempted to make decisions based on what do my people think. But who are your people? You need to figure out who your people are. We know this in other areas of life. When, I'm not sure if this applies, but there's trendy and there's timeless, right? I'm going to get in trouble with the women. I get that, right? But I'm telling you, if you're always trying to be trendy, you always have to change where you're going. You have to change your wardrobe, whatever you're doing. But if you choose something that's timeless, it will stand the test of time for multi-generations. Too often, we want to look around us, and we look at society around us, and we want to be trendy. This is what I'm going at. And guess what? You're going to have to constantly be looking to what's next. But if you go to the scriptures and recognize that there's something timeless and multi-generational about following God. One of the areas where, especially all of us, but especially us, among us that are women and mothers, that we're often vulnerable is this idea of group identity. You're very aware and you're sensitive to who's in and who's out. Recognize that as you look to people for approval, the people that you make your center of belonging actually matters. Who are your people, and what area are you most influenced when it comes to vulnerability? You hold tremendous influence over the direction of your children. I'm going to shift a little bit here. Ever since, and we're going to just simply do a blessing on the mothers for the last little bit here. Ever since God created Eve, who was taken from the side of Adam, there have been mothers who've nurtured, coddled, counseled, scolded, and spanked. The Bible is full of examples of mothers who have played their part in shaping the world to be a better and definitely more beautiful place, both by their touch and by their presence. We could have looked at others as well, I get that, but the Bible is full of mothers that are incredibly. We looked at Sarah, her disappointment and infertility, but she came to be the mother of a nation. Leah was overlooked by her own husband, but she found fulfillment in her children. Jochebed defied the authorities, saved Moses, and in doing so had a great part to play in God's story. We don't know much about Pharaoh's daughter, but there was another one. Maybe the first case of adoption in the Bible, where a woman, probably single at the time, saw a need, stepped in, become a mother through unconventional ways. God used her. We talk about Hannah a lot. I'm going to read in Proverbs 31, it says, 26 to 31, it says,